Welcome to the Justified Posteriors podcast, the podcast that updates its beliefs about the economics of AI and technology. I'm Seth Benzel, exposed to and exposing myself back to the AI since 2015, coming to you from Chapman University in sunny Southern California.
And I'm Andre Fratkin, riding the J-curve of productivity into the infinity, coming to you from Cambridge, Massachusetts. And today we're very delighted to have friend of the show, Daniel Rock, as our inaugural interview guest. Daniel is an assistant professor of operations, information, and decisions, I believe, at Wharton at University of Pennsylvania, and is also an AI 2050 Schmidt Sciences Fellow. So he's considered one of the bright young minds in AI in the world, and so it's a real pleasure to get to talk to him about his work and spicy takes, if you will.
Well, it's a pleasure to get to be here. I'm a big fan of what you guys are doing, obviously. And I guess if I had my intro, I would say that I've been enthusiastic about getting machines to do linear algebra for about a decade now.
All right. Well, let's get started with some questions. I think before we get
Firstly, how do you pronounce the acronym OID?
Oh, this is a big debate between the students and the faculty. We always say OID, and the students say OID.
OID. Well.
Oi.
So our very own Oi boy. All right, Andre, now you can ask the serious question.
No. Well, before we get into any of the specific papers, I think one of the things that distinguishes Daniel from many other academics in our circle is that he took AI very seriously as a subject of inquiry for social sciences very early. Yeah, as before almost anyone else. So. What led you to that? Why were you so ahead of everyone else?
I'm not sure. Well, it's all relative, I suppose. But there's the very far back answer, which we can talk about later as we talk about, kind of labor and AI. And then there was the sort of core catalyst day. I kind of remember it. So back at the MIT IDE, where we've all spent time and gotten to know each other, in 2013,
Can you say what's the IDE?
The Initiative on the Digital Economy. Eric Brynjolfsson's research group. I was one of Eric's PhD students. My first year, we had a seminar speaker from the Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Lab, CSAIL. John Leonard was talking about self-driving cars. And he came out there and he said, look, Google's cheating. They're putting sensors in the road. We're building the real deal. Cars that can drive themselves in all sorts of different circumstances. And let me be real with all of you. This is not going to be happening anytime soon. It will be decades. And there were other people who are knowledgeable about the subject saying, no, it's coming in 5 to 10 years. And at that point, I thought to myself, well, if all these really brilliant people can disagree about what's going to happen, surely there's something cool here to try to understand. And, as you're going through econometrics classes, I wouldn't say econometrics are the same thing as AI. We could debate that. But there's enough of an overlap that I could kind of get my head around the optimization routines and things going on in the back end of the AI models, and thought, well, this is a cool place to learn a lot and at the same time maybe say something that other people haven't dug into yet.
Yeah, very cool. So with that, I think maybe you can tell us a little bit about your paper, GPTs or GPTs, which is kind of a paper that has had an enormous amount of attention over the years, and I think it's been quite influential.
Yeah, we've been lucky in that sense.
Over the 2 years.
Well, no, I mean
2 years.
That's not. I mean, some version of it was out earlier, no, or is it only really been 2 years?
It has been the longest. Andre, if you and I weren't already sort of bald, it might have been a time period for us to go bald. Yeah, we put it out March of 2023. I had a little bit of early access to GPT-4. My co-authors can attest to the fact that I rather annoyingly try to get GPT-4 to delete itself for the first week or two that I had it, rather than doing the research we needed to. But yeah, it's only been about 2 years, 2.5. Okay, so the paper, as I describe it, at least recently, it's kind of got a Dickensian quality to it. There is a pessimistic component, there is an optimistic component, and there's a realistic component to it. We go through ONET's list of tasks. There's 20,000 tasks in ONET. And for each one of those tasks, we ask both a set of humans who are working with OpenAI, they kind of understand what large language models in general are capable of doing. What would help you cut that time in half? So could you cut the time to do this task in half with a large language model with no drop in quality? And the answer is there's three. One answer is, of course not. That's like flipping a burger or something. Maybe we get large language models imbued into robotics technologies at some point in the future, but it's not quite there yet. Another question is, of course you can. This would be like writing an email or processing, I don't know, billing details or an invoice. And then there's the middle one, which we call E2. So E0 is no, E1 is yes, E2 is yes, you could, but we're going to need to build some additional software and systems around it. So there's a gain to be had there, but it's not like LLMs are the only component of the system. And the reason we pick other software is because there's a pretty deep literature on how software and information technologies generally require a lot of co-invention, a lot of additional processes and tangible capital. It makes it difficult to deploy those technologies fruitfully. And we figured, okay, by comparing that E1 category, the yes, you can with an LLM out of the box, to the E2 category, how much do additional systems and innovation get us? We could say something about, whether generative pre-trained transformers, GPTs, are general purpose technologies. That is, they'll be pervasive, they improve over time, and they necessitate that kind of complementary innovation. They change the direction of innovation. If we can say yes to those three things, then we're in a situation where we get to the pessimistic version of the story. You just can't know what the long-term equilibria are going to be across different markets as a result of these tools. So the prognostications that, oh, yes, AI is coming to annihilate all the jobs, that, the machine god is imminent, or at least the economic machine god is imminent. I think those are a bit premature if you look and say this is general purpose technology, because historically general purpose technologies have been hard to predict at the outset. Okay, so the optimistic side of things is that impact potential is pervasive. There's a lot of benefit to be had in changing how people work. We use this exposure measure. I'm sure we'll get into this, but exposure is not automation. Exposure is potential for change. And if there's potential for fruitful change, we get more value in lots of different places in the economy. That's a good story. We found, and if the reviewer is listening to this, thank you very much. One of our reviewers suggested looking at science and innovation tasks, research and development tasks, and seeing how those compare to other areas. We found high levels of exposure in those areas, which means there's potential to turbocharge growth, at least temporarily, hopefully longer term in the economy. So that's the optimistic component. On the realistic component, we compare the yes, you can do something better with an LLM here to the yes, you can, but you need more building. The set of tasks that get exposed if you build additional systems, if you were to snap your fingers and say, hey, we've got everything we need, that's much, much bigger than the stuff that's just exposed to LLMs on its own. So the realistic story is we have a lot of work to do as a society, in the global economy to bring about the gains of these tools. And we'll probably take a few decades for it all to play out, as much as we think that the changes have been very quick. It has been a fast 2 years, right? So slow, depending on how you ask.
This has been great. All right. Yeah. Andre and I are both bursting with questions.
Well, I want just a quantification, because I think, so what percentage of tasks are exposed according to the first definition, and what percentage of tasks are according to the second definition? Approximately.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, about 14% of tasks or 15% of tasks, depending if you're looking at the human ratings or the GPT-4 ones. GPT-4 and humans tend to agree, by the way. There's some noise there, but if you look at I think the GPT-4 ones, it's about 14% of tasks for E1, the level where it's just LLMs can help. Now, if you snapped your fingers again and said, now it's E2 and E1, that's about 46% of tasks. If I might have my numbers slightly off there, but that's roughly what the numbers were.
And did you calculate what share of occupations have 100% of their tasks exposed?
There were very few, if any, occupations that were 100% exposed. I think data scientist was up there. And it depends on the measure. So we actually have 3 different combinations of these scores. The most conservative is saying it's just E1, and then that's it. The least conservative is E1 and E2. You score each task that has either one of those labels as a 1 and E0, 0. And then there's this kind of intermediate one that I like, but my co-authors don't like as much, where E1 gets a 1 and E2 gets a 0.5. So it depends what you look at. Mathematicians were highly exposed. My co-author Pamela has gotten some angry emails from mathematicians saying, no, that can't be. I will say I use it for building theory now. I use the language models for building theoretical models, and they do a pretty good job. They make some pretty terrible mistakes occasionally, so you do have to check their work. But like to go from a verbal sketch of what you're trying to prove to, some math that roughly shows what the setup should be, it makes it easier to be a reviewer instead of a doer, as they say.
Sure. All right. Okay. A couple questions from me. Yeah. So the first question is, are we talking literally when we're doing these E1 ratings? Are we talking literally about ChatGPT 4, or are we talking kind of generally about LLMs of approximately that quality, or are we projecting forward to kind of near future LLMs?
Yeah, it was more the latter. We had a sense of like where LLM tools were going to go. I think even looking at this set of tools we have now and GPT-4, they're very similar. There's like expanded capabilities. It's kind of been a deepening of their capabilities, but that was somewhat foreseeable, especially for my colleagues who had been and co-authors who'd been like in the weeds with this. But that does bring up an important weakness of this approach, which is as soon as you see something really qualitatively different, like new capabilities showing up, you have to update. The rubrics, the method, you got to rerun stuff. I think arguably the reasoning model paradigm is getting to the point where you probably have to rerun things.
Are you are you going to rerun things? Is this like an ongoing endeavor, or you've proven your point?
I'm not sure I'm going to return to writing an academic paper that does that. I feel like I've gone to the well one too many times already with this. But if someone else wants to do it, I'm happy to help them out with it. We did Eric Brynjolfsson, Tom Mitchell, and I did something in roughly 2016 looking at supervised machine learning. Showed some slightly different conclusions, but now that I've been through this, twice, I'm not sure that I want to do it just yet. So
this is a question that I wanted to kind of raise, because these sorts of exercises, certainly you guys are not the first to do this sort of exercise, and you've done it before, Frey and Osborne have done it. And, I remember when I was thinking about these exercises, when I first saw them back in 2017, 2018, I was like, this is a counting exercise. Is this actually useful? How do you, determine, like, in what sense is this type of work useful, and like how should we
another critique out there?
How should we respond?
To throw another critique of this whole research agenda out there. I mean, we talk about Frey and Osborne coming out with one of these a decade ago. You talk about your own SML experiences. I know Morgan Frank has a new paper at PNAS Nexus out that compares about like 10 different people's different exposure measures.
Which all do different things, yeah.
And they're all completely different.
Yeah.
How should I think about the diversity of these indices?
Yeah, I think, there's different principal components underlying a lot of these different measures. Certainly SML and the GPT scores are very different. And Frey and Osborne, just the way they constructed that effectively
was vibes-based, basically.
Yeah, educated guess vibes with CS professors for a training set. I think their goal is like to measure which jobs, like whole jobs, could be computerized. And Well, actually, let me answer Andre's question a little bit more directly. Like, when you look at these, what are they useful? Let me start by saying what they're not useful for, because actually, some folks have put words in our mouths on this. I can't speak for like
including Nobel laureates.
No Nobel laureates that I know of, but there are some folks who said things like, if you're exposed, you're hosed, and this is what the authors tend to value. I will say
it does rhyme with the word hosed. You did set them up for that.
It is possible that is the case, but I don't think I have not seen any data to conclude that is the case. So let me state clearly for the record, things you do not want to predict with exposure scores, things that exposure scores are not designed to do. Economically meaningful outcomes like wages or like employment are not things. I'm not trying to say exposed will create unemployment. I'm not saying it'll cause wage loss. I view it as a risk measure. I'm a recovering finance guy. I think there's risk can be good. It can be bad. We don't really know. It just means there's an opportunity, technically speaking, to change the types of tasks that people are doing and how they do them. So exposed and hosed are not are possibly orthogonal ideas. Nevertheless, I think it's worth tracking. Now, what else is it not useful for besides failing to predict labor market equilibria? It's not useful.
Can it make me breakfast?
Can what make you breakfast?
You're saying
scores?
What is it not useful for? Do you want to list all the things it's not useful for? Excuse me.
Exhaustively, yes. We should. You can't eat the scores either. I wouldn't say it's especially useful for saying for sure that this is going to happen, right? Like, if a technical thing that could help someone do a role does not necessarily mean it's appropriate socially, legally, politically. There's a whole bunch of different places where using LLMs might be inappropriate. One example, a famous one, Jeff Hinton predicted that radiology demand would drop. And I think we are seeing, say, an appropriate example of where a multimodal model would be helpful in radiology. It could probably pick up a broken bone. But radiologists, as data-enabled doctors, have a lot of other components to their work, and they interpret difficult cases. If you're going to tell someone about a condition that they've got and it's challenging, that's not the sort of thing where you want an LLM just spitting out like, you have this wrong. That would be terrible bedside manner. So even if it's theoretically possible, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. So turning now to where are they useful then? One is for testing this hypothesis. Are we limited in what we can say, which is my favorite application of them, in the sense that we see pervasive and complementarity and necessitating exposure throughout the economy. So we should dial back our confidence in terms of predictions of what will happen. That, I think, they were useful for answering a very specific hypothesis that we had. But then underneath that,
to be clear, so you were able to. The hypothesis is that they are GPTs. You have a definition of GPTs. Yes, they're going to affect everything. They're GPTs.
Yes, and the only one of the three conditions in are they GPTs that we punt on is improving over time, because that one was obvious. We do have some evidence, but we mostly punt. Now, getting beyond that, I think the first order changes and where they're most likely to happen. I didn't know that this would be the case when we wrote the paper, but I think those measures that we built tended to predict where people would start adopting large language models. And there's been a few papers validating that empirically. That
makes perfect sense, right? So it's maybe not a good model of what's going to happen to your job, but it's a good model of where the OpenAI salesman should show up and knock on the door.
Yeah, potentially, right? So the you guys discussed this paper earlier on the podcast, but the Anthropic Economic Index, the areas where they thought people, or where they were showing people are using Claude, lined up reasonably well with the areas we thought, GPT-like LLMs would show up to.
Except managerial tasks.
Managerial tasks,
sorry,
those are happening. It's just not clear. I'm not sure what's going on in that data set. In my work as a startup co-founder, I use I use all sorts of large language models for managerial tasks all the time. So we'll see what
I
happens
used
there.
a large language model for managerial tasks earlier today, so I agree with you.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It seems like these AIs are being used. If you look at the Anthropic Index, it really does focus on people using it in kind of these hobby contexts, is
Right.
kind of one of our big takeaways from that episode. So, I mean, people don't manage as a hobby. So if a lot of Claude usage is hobby usage, you wouldn't expect that. You would expect that to be underrepresented.
You're saying that with the exception of like the technical folks like software engineers and data scientists just like ripping with this stuff, right? Like, because
But
that's not
Right,
necessarily
right.
they're ripping with it in Cursor. I mean, and now we're getting to the
sure.
weeds of that
Yeah,
paper.
API use. Yeah.
But
Right. So of course that's the giant use case right now.
Yeah. And that one's a great one. It's kind of ironic given our focus on software, but like to some extent, you can keep doing what you were doing, but just do it way better in software development with these tools. Like you don't actually have to transform the structure of software engineering too much to just get like a very quick benefit. But I think there is a new mode of working and developing with AI driven tools that has an analogy in the that famous computer in the dynamo paper, the steam engine to electric power conversion. If you think of the steam engine, right, for the listeners who aren't aware, you've got like this giant thing in the middle of the factory, and all these pulleys, levers, belts come off of that thing, and it powers the whole factory. And then over the next few decades, they realized let's modularize that power when we convert to electric power. Because the first thing to do with electric power was do the same thing, but like a little bit better. Take a giant dynamo, stick it in the middle of the room, and we're off and running. But eventually they were like, well, what if we make that really small? And then we have lots of little machines all powered by their own little engine. Sort of similar, and I'm seeing this with some large companies. You start with a really monolithic, large technology function in the middle of the company that kind of like shuts off to power lots of subgroups, build technology for them. And then something kind of magical happens with these AI models. You can sit down with a subject matter expert, a product person, a sort of a senior developer to make sure that these people don't hurt themselves as they're building something. And you create these like modular, the Jeff Bezos two pizza team version of work where people have input into a process. And then rather than throwing that process over the wall to the dev team, waiting 3 weeks and seeing them come back with something that doesn't fit, you just develop together and watch the models go. And it really ups your cadence, but it opens up all sorts of best practice shortfalls that can happen. Like, have you hardened for security properly? The devs know what questions to ask there. So going from like a specification to like a finished product can be way, way quicker if you redesign how the work goes. And it's kind of similar, I guess, to that steam powered to electric thing.
So I guess maybe the natural place to go here with is there's kind of this distinction between the micro level exposure of a task and the macro level implication. So how should we be thinking about that? And certainly people have used your micro level exposure metrics in macroeconomic models. And so, maybe you have some thoughts on that.
Talk about that. Tell us about what that experience was like.
People use them in different ways. There's papers that you guys have discussed on the podcast before. And if you look at the Simple Macroeconomics of AI paper by Daron Acemoglu, he uses our sort of experimental automation score, which is not could you use an LLM to improve your task output here. It's like, could you use an LLM to just straight up do this task without a person involved? It's a really small proportion of tasks in the economy that meet, that's a 5-point scale kind of. So our fourth or fifth most intensive automation risk scores. I don't love those scores, to be honest, but they are in a pretty narrow area. So it's not surprising that we find, or, that we read in his paper, I should say, a 7 basis points a year outcome. The OECD has a version where they use the exposure scores, and they get to something like 70 basis points of productivity growth per year. So it's all of Daron Acemoglu's gains right there, but per year. I think, these are a public good, these scores in some sense, and people bring their models and their priors to, they're trying to discipline what they believe will happen about the economy with these scores, and they're noisy. And I wish there was something more useful for these people to deploy in their models. But to the extent that we can be helpful, we're really happy that this thing is out there. I just, I caution folks against viewing exposure as automation, which is a common failure mode, or even leaning on things like automation and augmentation as the choice that we have ahead of us. At the macro level, like Andre, to your point, the macro level conclusions, yes, labor markets are how we share the gains from economic activity primarily across society. And then when you get down to a micro level task and you're asking a worker or manager or worker combo, like, are you upset if we automate this task or augment this task? Either one, it's anything goes. It's about the labor market and the unit of work that's being purchased in the labor market. I could automate something I hate doing and be thrilled with it because I could go spend my time doing other stuff. I could automate my whole job and make me really sad. Maybe really sad, but I'd have to find another job. I could augment someone and make them thrilled and pay them more. Or I could augment them such that they take the jobs, they do the work of 10 different people, and then 9 people get fired. So I think this augmentation automation micro question really does boil down to just exposure and changing work. And we can't say much more than that. And I don't think, even though automation and augmentation has like an elegant mathematical framing in these models, I don't think it's something that we can lean on from a policy perspective at the micro level. It's just like you're going to change what people do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to push back on the idea that it's an elegant micro idea, right? Because for exactly the reasons you point out...
Macro idea, I should say. It's an elegant macro idea. I don't think it's an elegant micro idea. Yeah.
Right, but even then it's kind of... let me put it this way. To me, when people want to distinguish between augmenting and automating technologies, they want to talk about them in somehow separate from the rest of the economy. But as you've been implying, the real reason you can't say a certain technology is automating or augmenting is because that production is embedded in an entire economy, and that's going to tell you whether, as productivity goes up, whether you want more or less of that thing. The way I would put it is to use the metaphor of Marshall's scissors. So there's a story that's told of the famous economist Marshall from the University of Cambridge, who was the advisor of John Maynard Keynes. And somebody asked him one day whether it was supply or demand, which was more important of setting the price for a certain good. Right. You know what Marshall said? Marshall said, it's like asking what blade of the scissor is doing the cutting, right? You can't talk about one without talking about the other if you want to know what the outcome is. And what I see your paper is it's one blade of the scissor, right? It's the one blade of the scissor that's coming in telling you this job can be changed, but you need to know everything else about the rest of the economy to understand how the job will be changed, right?
That's right.
And we've talked about examples, there are countless famous examples from the ATMs to I like this example of the cotton gin of jobs getting automated and then demand for that form of labor going up.
Right. Yeah.
However,
yeah.
Now, Dan, I do have a micro take, and I'm interested on whether you buy this prediction about what exposure scores will do to an occupation. Okay. This is a somewhat out of equilibrium take. This is a partial equilibrium dynamic take, and maybe it'll be smoothed out in the long run. But in the short run, my prediction is that in occupations that are more exposed, there will be more wage polarization at middle tier firms for that job and less wage polarization at extremely good or extremely bad firms that use that job. All right? So I've got a kind of a framework here. Are you ready? Can you see where I'm going with this, or are you ready for me to give the reason why?
I have some hypotheses about how that could work, but don't leave me hanging here.
All right. Okay. So should I start with the general equilibrium first, or should I start with the micro level first? Let's work bottom, work up. Okay. So imagine you've got a job that uses 2 tasks, right? Task 1 and task 2. They are they can be gross complements in production, but it's actually not important. But you need, there can be gross complements as long as they're not perfect substitutes, right? Okay. They can be gross substitutes. That's also fine. So I'm a doctor. I need to spend so much time having bedside manner, so much time recognizing the x-ray. I know that's not a perfect example, right? Okay. Now imagine a technology comes out that allows you to automate one of the two tasks, okay? Well, then obviously people who are worse than the technology at automating the automatable task automate it, and the people who are better than the technology at automating don't automate. I know this is already going to get a little bit off of the way that maybe you think about how things, but grant me that for a second. Okay, so what happens? People who are bad at task 1 but good at task 2 see a big improvement, whereas people who are good at task 1 and bad at task 2 see no improvement, right? Whereas, it kind of depends how good the thing, if you're equally good at both, it kind of depends. Okay. All right, so that's the first step. So where would you get wage polarization from automation? You would tend to get it in jobs when people's skills are anti-correlated, right? Because as we just said, if you're good at one and bad at two, and we automate one, it doesn't help you. But if you're bad at one and good at two, and we automate one, it helps you a lot. So you would expect to see kind of wage polarization, wage distribution expansion for jobs where people's skill levels are anti-correlated. Okay, so now you might say, sure, Professor Benzel, that sounds cool, but why would we ever expect in certain settings for wages, for skill levels to be anti-correlated? Okay, and now I'm going to bring in O-ring, right? So Kremer has a general equilibrium theory of the economy where the productivity of a firm or whatever is somehow bounded by kind of the worst agent in the system, right? So this comes from the Space Shuttle Challenger explosion. Space Shuttle explodes. We think it's because there's this one faulty part, the faulty O-ring. Okay, what's the general equilibrium implication of this model? It's basically that you should get people of different skill levels all concentrated at the same type of firm. So there should be super good firms that have all the high-skilled people, mediocre firms that have all the mediocre people, bad firms that have all the bad people. How do you get a mediocre person? Most mediocre people are mediocre because they're good at one thing and bad at another thing. Okay, so now we come back to my hypothesis, which is that exposure should lead. And in fact, I'd love to bring this to some experimental evidence. I'm kind of working with Kyle Myers, a great economist, friend of the show at HBS on this. Can we predict the experimental outcomes of you introduce AI to a place and it's exposed to some of the tasks? When do you get that polarization in productivity and wage, and when do you seem to just kind of boost everyone by the same amount?
Okay. So some quick reactions there. So just to immediately hop from automation to exposure, we're like,
Please.
Folks, I guess I'm going to ask you a question that, funnily enough, I was asked by Joe Stiglitz as a grad student. I was lucky enough to get to sit next to him at a lunch. He was like, why do jobs exist? Like, why are certain tasks bundled together? And honestly, I don't have a great answer other than to gesture, sort of vaguely at coordination costs.
Sure.
But within the task, shifting that you're discussing, and you've got this mediocrity or sort of middling productivity that comes from the fact that, some of the things they're good at, some of them they're not. It's still really hard to kind of blow apart the job and then reconstitute it with specialization. So I think where it's coming from is like people are overall, high productivity, and then there's a low productivity component, and then there's kind of this middle thing where you've got some CES aggregator that says, this person is going to be slightly worse than the average of their components. Exposure might lift them in some cases and might, not affect them in others. So I kind of buy that piece. To move it to the equilibrium framing, though, I think what'll probably happen in a lot of cases is like a mini Baumol's cost disease across everything that we do, where the areas where we're least productive are going to be the ones that absorb most of our time. And in the beginning, there will be a lot of confusion about that because LLMs will make it unclear what the least productive thing is. Now that you might be like really bad at something right now. I know like I'm really bad at writing like spec docs for software. Well, now I have a process with Claude where I can write much better spec docs, and I'm not as terrible at it. But once you get out of this sort of disequilibrium condition, you might end up in a situation that looks a lot like the one we have right now as things settle, but the job boundaries have changed, and there's new names for things. I'll give you a small example. There's a new hot job in Silicon Valley called the forward deployed engineer, where we've got some of these. This
Do they get combat hazard pay?
This is a role. At WorkHelix, we've got a forward deployed engineer looking for more. Winnie Ma, shout out, she just started.
And you're sitting at your desk waiting for them to call in air support. What's going on here?
So you send them to the customer site, and they work with customers. You need like really strong interpersonal skills, but you also need engineering skills. That's like a new configuration
Didn't we call these
of work.
people consultants? Wasn't that called being a consultant?
No.
I don't know. If you called them a consultant, then you wouldn't be able to pay them as a forward deployed engineer, Seth. What do you mean? This has nothing to do with what McKinsey would ever do.
I'm not sure that calling someone a consultant will. I'm not sure which end of that ends up being cheaper but for the firm. But the critical thing here is that that's a different mixture of work. So anyway, those are some initial reactions. Yeah.
I mean, I have reactions too. I mean,
please.
Yeah. I think on one level, I'm always a little skeptical of like intricate theories like this when
I have 2 parts. It has 2 parts you have to give me.
No. I'm more so that like the first order question is even about income inequality, right? Like that is hard to answer. And then you're trying to answer this even more sub question. And I guess like where I'll push back on in terms of, let's say the highest earning firms, right? Like, production could be O-ring within a person, or production can be O-ring across people, right?
It actually turns out that the prediction does not rely on whether O-ring is within people. As long as the tasks aren't perfect substitutes, what I just described goes through.
But I guess what I would think is that if we have specialists in like 10 different tasks at a high-end firm, and then one of those tasks gets automated, one of those people's jobs gets fully automated. And I know Daniel is not liking automation already, but that person's wage.
I do believe it exists.
That person's wage will go down, right? Creating inequality.
But I have a theory of one of your tasks being automated, not a theory of all of your tasks being automated.
But that's kind of where my point is. Like, I tend to think of. I mean, it's an interesting question. With high-end firms have a lot of specialization, maybe perhaps more specialization than lower-end firms, and so then each person is so specialized that if their specialty is very hit, then we might expect a bigger labor market effect for them.
Right. You might imagine if tasks are organized differently at large firms, this theory would run into issues. Of course, there's admitted variable problems up the wazoo, but I'm intrigued by the idea of looking into whether people's skills in these tasks, which make up their task bundle, which is their job, whether their skills in those subtasks are positively or negatively correlated. And I do think that will tell you a lot about what happens when you automate part of the task, part of the job. So now bringing that to the data is complicated, but that's my insight.
So I think the other thing I just say one more thing is just how much do we expect new firm entry to be the key margin with all of this, right? We know that organizations...
Probably that's a huge margin too.
Organizations are very frictionful in adoption decisions, even when they...
New organizations, new jobs.
Yeah.
Right? If you slice out half of the task from a job, in the long run, it's probably a new job.
Yeah, I mean, so I think both of those. So then in terms of thinking about existing firms, it's a little tricky for me in general. Or at least I expect, maybe I'll be wrong, I expect a lot more entry and growth from new companies that are kind of taking advantage of this new production process from the ground up. That's kind of the lesson of the supply side disruption theory.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think one of the reasons it takes such a long time for the benefits of, sufficiently transformative technologies to show up is usually it takes a while for the firms that are deploying them well to become economically meaningful.
Right, so that's another margin, right? That's not the margin on it. Your margin is the firms that figure out how to do it grow faster, which is a whole nother margin.
And I think agreeing with Andre that a lot of them are new entrants. Then it's not like an incumbent will always figure out the answer, nor do they have to a lot of the time. Where I would ask you a question then, Seth, just on the idea that like the bundled tasks that you have some spectrum from super negatively correlated to perfectly correlated, like individual task productivities. Like, why do you think, if those tasks are bundled together because there's some coordination cost benefit, do you think there's probably some like lower bound on how negatively correlated your productivity can be? Because like, across these different tasks, because like if you really suck at half your job, you probably like can't do that job.
Right.
I think you probably need weak positive correlation everywhere.
Ooh, man. I think that I think for the sorting to happen, so we're going to take 1,000 people who are all doctors. And I agree that you kind of want to think about the step before that, where before we get the 1,000 doctors. But I'm saying now that we have 1,000 doctors, some of them are going to be better at task 1 and some of them are going to be better at task 2. And then you're going to get negative correlation across those abilities in the mediocre firms. Now, you're right, there might be some censoring. You can't be so bad at one of the tasks you don't become a doctor, but I'm saying conditional on you have become one.
Okay. I could see that. Yeah. And thinking about like a Dr. House situation, like everybody hates him, but he's really, really good at like the diagnostic side of things. But like if he weren't, then no one would put up with that. He would have just been fired, right?
Right, he'd have a higher paying job and be more productive if he was able to be nice for 10 minutes.
But I think there's also kind of like
or something.
A mirroring here to like a general phenomenon in digitization, which is like the ability for specialization for like more niche content to do really well, right? So if you're truly only good at a task and now all the complementary tasks have been automated away, then you shouldn't be bound by your firm anymore. Like you should be able to essentially create your own small business or join the most productive firm as, the specialists in that specific area, because all your other characteristics don't really matter that much anymore. So Dr. House would be able to essentially officially run a business, even though he's really bad at like organizational things, because all that stuff is, comes out of the box. Yeah.
Yep.
Right. And I think that's why I talked about this theory as being kind of a short-term partial equilibrium theory, because in the long run, you reinvent jobs, you reinvent businesses.
Mm-hmm.
So you said something really interesting, David, and maybe I will start to transition us now, about the idea that it's going to take time for people to figure out how to use these GPTs, right? The general purpose technology that is chatbots, or LLMs, excuse me. What sort of macroeconomic implications does that have? I understand you've written a little bit on this topic.
Yeah, right. We call this Eric Chad Severson and I call this the productivity J curve. It's really I think the dynamic is when you see with pretty much any kind of investment. There's an initial outlay period where things are expensive, and then there's a harvesting period later. There's the famous Robert Solow quote, you see computers everywhere except in the productivity statistics. People were already starting that with AI. I've seen a number of news articles like there's no ROI for this. I think the way you kind of square the circle here is you say, well, in the beginning of a new technology, when everyone realizes, okay, we're going to take the plunge, we're actually going to invest in this, you spend a lot of time kind of reconfiguring work, building new business processes, trying to figure out what new products to build, collecting information, a whole bunch of really expensive stuff that's really hard to quantify. So it doesn't end up in GDP to the extent that it could, but that's building up a capital asset. So output is going to be understated. In the meantime, while we have this, it's going to look like we're putting in more to get less out. Then later, that intangible asset is actually there, but not measured. And now it's an input instead of an output. And when it starts to spit off money, then everyone's going to say, oh, hey, look at how productive we're being because it looks like you're getting more as an output for less as input. Really, it's just that thing paying off. So that tension between the growth rate of investment in this new type of capital and the growth rate of the capital stock that you're missing, that difference, depending on its share in the overall economy, can be meaningful. And we use the stock market to measure it because investors aren't dumb on average. They price these assets, or companies wouldn't invest in them. Under a roughly efficient markets hypothesis version of the world, but if you're pricing those assets, then you can kind of back out roughly the magnitude of that adjustment you should be making to productivity growth. So it's kind of a fun spin on growth accounting, which I know isn't the reason everybody gets out of bed in the morning.
Oh man, dude, don't underestimate our audience.
Well, look. I mean, big political debates hinge on the measured rate of GDP growth. So in the end, it's important. How big of an effect did you find in that paper?
Oh, I don't remember the exact numbers anymore. It's been a little while. I should look it up, but it's a lot. If I recall correctly, it might be something like 75 basis points a year for some period of time. The overall view is like, look, we have good news and bad news. The good news is that the productivity growth rate level is actually a bit higher than we had thought. Once you account for these hidden assets. The bad news is that the slowdown from 2005 is even bigger than we thought because they were building intangible assets back then too.
Well, how do you compare the rate of growth of intangible asset investment? I think this is kind of the key.
What's bigger, the invisible teapot or the invisible elephant?
Yeah, because right now we're getting a lot of intangible investment into like learning new production processes with AI or other.
Is the answer just look at how much the stock market go up? Is that the answer?
Oh, that's basically it, Seth. You're not too far off. We do a hedonic regression. If we were to look at, say, like the R&D assets, because this one's kind of mature, you don't really see too much from R&D on its own. But like we can see if a dollar of R&D investment capitalized is actually worth like $1.10, in market value. We assume that there is 10 cents of intangible correlate value there. Or if you really want to be pedantic about it, it's 10 cents of intangible correlate combined with quasi rents from the fact that you can integrate R&D investment better for productive purposes than your competitors could. And then I'm going to wave my hands and say, but that's actually an asset. So it's an intangible asset too.
Right.
So,
this is something. I mean, I remember us spending lots of time back in the day in the MIT IDE break room, having a cup of coffee, looking out over the Charles. Jerome walking by, Ator walking by, locked in these intense conversations about just how do you measure these intangible assets? They seem so essential to everything, and yet they are literally the latent vaporware. They're our generation's TFP, if you will.
Well,
yeah, that's right.
Andre, I don't know. I mean, look, I think the principle, I obviously agree with, right? Like you have these investments that are not easily measurable, and they surely should be counted, in some way. But it's not obvious to me how, if the rate of intangible investment were constant over time, then it's a constant adjustment, and we don't really have to think very much differently about how the world works. But then I think measuring the intangibles, that's kind of tricky, because I think about market cap as something that not only you're already talking about rents, but to me, competition is so important there, right? You don't gain market cap just because you're doing investment. You gain market cap because you have market power in the future. And that's a different...
But now you have to think about it. Like, why would you ever pay an adjustment cost? In a perfectly competitive economy, you never make the adjustment cost, right?
Well, I would say that, there are different degrees of market power that can exist. Or, you can have your kind of standard monopolistic competition model where everyone's kind of keeping up to keep up. But then you can have companies like your Googles and whatever, where we clearly don't think that the right model of the world is that. I mean, Yeah, and I guess the other thing is I will forever be skeptical of firm value regressions. I think the endogeneity issues are fatal, but I don't know.
Yeah, I disagree with you there. It's
Dan,
just,
you're dead now. You just died. You were just killed.
I feel so devastated.
Yeah.
No, I think, where I disagree is, I think Tim Bresnahan put it this way. He was just like, well, everything's an asset here, including the capacity to generate rents. So it's an interpretation question more than anything else. And you can bound things, right? Like, it's not like when you go and run some of these regressions, you're not saying, I think that an additional unit of AI investment causes this market cap. The endogeneity, it's predictive. It's like, here's a price on this thing. It's not
But
at
some
all
of that
saying
might not be
if
due
you're
to investment, right? That's right. Some of it might be.
You could have lucked into it. It could have been.
Yeah,
maybe,
it could be luck.
So here's a model.
Exactly.
There's only room for one social media platform. So whoever got there first, planted their flag on that land. They didn't make an intangible investment. They just planted their flag first.
right. I'm saying that too. It's like they planted the flag first, and now it's worth $10. But I'm not saying
But
if you were to just go,
didn't cost $10, which is, it seems like.
oh yeah, you're talking about the marginal versus
Yes.
inframarginal
Yeah.
differences. Yeah. For sure. And the way you deal with that, as opposed, as you do in any structural models, you assume it away and say that marginal equals average Q for some of these. But it's not like when you run these regressions that you get coefficients of 1,000. You get coefficients of like somewhere between 4 and 12. So, is it unsatisfying?
Explain that. You 4 and 12 what's?
So if I were to say regress market value on measures of IT capital, the multiplier I get, and this has been sort of stable in weird ways for 20 years, the coefficients you get are somewhere between $1 of IT investments correlated with like $4 of market value on the low end to like $12 of market value on the high end. And it's, that bounds the debate. It's not saying this is infinitely valuable. There's this like enormous intangible asset that's the entire economy. And then it's also not saying it's nothing. So I think that imposing some assumptions, which you can absolutely question, and I think we all should to try to get better models, imposing some assumptions and doing the best you can is a way to learn something as opposed to like, just throwing our hands up. But yeah, I agree with you that the causal interpretation of these things is not correct.
Well, so let me ask you then. So, okay, the useful question, I mean, I know my audience wants to know, are we in the good part of the J-curve right now, or are we in the bad part of the J-curve?
Which part's good and which part's bad?
The good part is when you're going to get more growth down the line than it looks like you have now.
We are in the hard work investment stage of the J-curve,
okay,
which
and
I view as the
part.
Yeah, I don't think we're anywhere close. At least not for AI. I don't think we're anywhere close to the harvesting side yet.
But you think we're in the GDP is underestimated side, is what I mean by the good side.
Yeah, I would say very modestly, GDP is underestimated right now.
Very modestly, 1%, 2%.
I think that's probably ambitious, but
ballpark 1%, order of magnitude 1%.
Yeah, so where it's tough is like the parts of AI investment that are happening right now, I think are actually fairly well captured by GDP. Like seeing a huge amount of CapEx and data centers, GPUs, like those things are priced pretty well. The hard part,
we're just scaling now.
Yeah. But eventually people are going to, how do you make someone responsible for hallucinations that the models might make? Like, or come up with good policies that get people to create good outcomes there. Like, that's a hard thing to do. I don't think we're like anywhere close to scratching the surface with that.
But I guess the intangible investments now are more like, how do we think about teaching using ChatGPT? Because that's not going to be measured in like a change in labor inputs, but it's actually like something that is, not going to materialize until we actually figure out how to, teach people more effectively. Not clear that was ever a GDP, but well, if we were a regular for-profit firm at the university, that's
yeah. So that stuff will take a while. I don't know. I think even if we stopped, I say we, it's not the right pronoun here.
We, you mean all of the people who actually do work in the economy are the people you're referring to, I believe.
Right. And in particular, the AI researchers. If AI researchers stopped building new LLM tools and making these things better today, we would still have quite a while to actually integrate this and put them to their best use. So that's kind of a bummer.
Okay, well, then let me ask it that way. So if you don't want to give me like a percentage rate of intangible investment, either above or below average, do we need to spend 100% of GDP over the course of the next 20 years in order to take these advantages? Cumulatively, how many intangible investments do we have in front of us? Do you have a sense of the order of magnitude of that?
I don't know how deep the well goes, no. But it might be quite a lot. Yeah.
Like one thing related to this, I was thinking about when we were talking about part one, was you got these two measures of jobs AI exposure, one of which is quote unquote just the LLM, and one of which is the LLM plus software tools. Didn't you tell us that you can use LLMs to make software tools?
Oh yeah, it's totally recursive. But the reason we pick up on software tools is because it also requires the changing of business practices and these organizational things.
So that's the way to. Okay, can we play that game then? Can we look at the wedge between E1 and E2 as telling us something about the size of the adjustment costs needed or the intangible assets needed?
I don't think it gives you that, to be honest. Sorry, Seth. I know my tools are unsatisfying here. That's a good research question, though. Like, what is the? I think actually the market value regressions that Andre hates are more likely to get you in the ballpark for that.
Yeah.
Do any sort of policy ideas come out of the J curve? Should we be like somehow subsidizing intangible investment? Do you think this is happening at a socially suboptimal rate? I mean, you would expect that, like any innovation, you'd expect there to be positive externalities as people copy and learn from each other.
I don't have any evidence to suggest it happens at that there's an externality here that needs some sort of correction. Where I could see some policy considerations, and obviously I'm not in charge of any of these things, so take what I have to say with a grain of salt, and as you would for anything else I say.
You're my president.
Seth, he's running.
We're running. We're announcing today.
I think when it comes to like monetary policy and thinking about how quickly, like how hot or cold is the economy, it may be helpful to know how much intangible asset creation is happening, because it's a compositional shift. And you might think that the economy is in a recession when it's actually doing quite well, at least in certain pockets. There's a distribution of gains question here that's pretty important, like who creates the intangible capital versus who benefits from it versus who's just like shut out of that part of the economy altogether. But I think on average, you might want to know if your growth rate's actually like, in real terms, 2.5% versus 1.25% or something as a result of this shift.
And I guess you would look at the stock market. So if we have kind of this case where the stock market is going up, but GDP is not going up as much, maybe you'd be like, that's okay on some margin.
The stock market is an increasingly less useful tool, sadly, because there's fewer public firms and there's other reasons that those large firms would be different than the rest of the economy. It's just a quick thing to do. So it's easy to get those market values and start to pull that info. But I think the ideal thing to do is to have an actual sense of how these assets are priced. Like you could look at M&A costs for whole software firms. Sadly, you can't like shave off a tiny piece of your digital culture and market it and sell it to someone to get a little bit of a value indication. But I think much more complete data to give you a sense of like what are these assets being valued at could be helpful. That's if you're willing to buy into an enterprise that I more or less do, which is that on the margin, these asset markets or securities markets are doing a pretty good job. If you think that there's some sort of like bias in them that prevents you from actually sorting them out, like let's say everything were priced in terms of ETH, and I mean obviously there's no hype factor in crypto, but Let's assume a wild assumption for a second that crypto is not priced at its actual long-term fundamental value. And you were using crypto prices to back out the value of all illicit trade around the world. You might mistake illicit trade assets as being super valuable in that case, if those crypto coins are a claim on future illicit trade value.
What about
No, the idea is the stock market may look really good, but the companies are building evil products, so don't anticipate welfare growth.
Well, this is the Daron point of view that all the AI innovation is for making social media more addictive.
Right, which is, in my view of the world, an asset.
What about the GPTs paper? Does that have any policy implications? Or I guess any follow-on work that you have on that?
I understand you've looked at how firms differ by these exposure measures.
Yeah, a little bit. One of the conclusions there. So there's if you were to look at the exposure of firms against their quantities of tech workers, and there's a little bit of a mechanical relationship here because tech workers are highly exposed. But there is a difference across companies, whatever exposure measure you want to use. And the reason we do that, Seth, is precisely because of what you brought up. You can use these tools to build better technology. So in some sense, those companies might have a good reason to run away in performance. But the differences, from low to high exposure in any of these measures across firms are not nearly as big as the differences from E1 to E2 to E1 plus E2. Those are really big. So every company could benefit if they went and started actually trying to transform, if they knew what a good direction to transform, would be. So that was kind of one of the points. I think from a policy perspective, I have a hard time separating what Tyler Cowen would call mood affiliation from what I think are good policies. But I'll just spit them out as some things I think are good to do. There are a few risks with these tools that scare me. The virology community, I think, should be fairly concerned about using turbocharged models to manufacture COVIDs or something, or God forbid some degrowther person decides that they want to kill half of humanity and go full Thanos.
I believe that's the plot to 12 Monkeys.
That's right, it is. So 12 Monkeys would be a bad reality to face. But aside from that, I think there's just so much drudgery, so much additional work that these things could do for us, and a lot of gains to be had. So my preference is not to regulate these models in any kind of aggressive way. I think it's to figure out what they're good for, and to develop with them. Not to say you can't mitigate other risks like bias or that Mecha Hitler thing with Grok was terrible. There are going to be bumps in the road along the way, but they're not the kind that would say to me, oh, we should do a 6-month pause in development. None of that really scares me yet.
You're not in favor of bombing the data centers?
No, I'm not. No. But I'm not a fan of Harry Potter fan fiction either. So I don't know. Maybe it's just correlated beliefs.
Just bias. So you brought up, bioterror in particular, but right now, as we speak, AI is being used en masse in warfare for identifying targets, for terminal target acquisition by missiles and drones. Increasingly in Ukraine, we're seeing use of automated ground vehicles for transporting resources to the front and for evac. People often go to these super sort of, I'm not going to say, 12 Monkeys is bizarre, but it's a pretty weird movie if you've ever seen it. Why do we have to appeal to that rather than just using AI to make, murder bots?
To some extent, the murder bot thing doesn't scare me that much. I'm human beings doing those things is also bad. I think the issue people have with those applications often will be scaling evil individuals, which is a serious concern, or just issues with war in general, which I understand. But if it's going to happen, I don't. We're kind of caught in a prisoner's dilemma there. what
Let me put it
freaks
this
me
way.
out.
I think a much more realistic near-term AI worry is like I have a drone hanging out in like down a suicide drone that just hangs out somewhere in Manhattan and waits for the particular person to walk out, and then I target assassinate people untraceably, right? That seems like here, as opposed to I use AI to build a lab to make a super disease, blah blah blah, that's got a lot of steps in it.
But I mean,
Right.
why would you
I
assume
think
it's untraceable, Seth? I guess like my presumption is that these sorts of actions do tend to be trace. Like there's no, in fact, AI is a way to trace people, right? So this is kind of one where, as with many AI questions, it's a defensive and an offensive technology.
Right, right. So to favor the offense or the defense, we had thought, it seems like intuitively you would think that AI would favor the offense, right? We think about like these super weapons like Daniel brought up. But if you actually look at Ukraine, I mean, it seems to create this transparent battlefield where no one can even march to the front, and in some ways seems to favor the defense. It's going to take a long, long time to play out.
Yeah, you guys would know the answer to this. I'm going to butcher this quote, but who's that sci-fi writer who said that like the job of a sci-fi storyteller is not to predict the driving cars, but to predict the traffic jam or whatever?
That's a good quote.
Yeah, I don't remember. I know the quote, but I don't remember who it is.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the idea. I think here that we want to predict what the traffic jams are. The reason like the biorisk stuff scares me so much is because we just had a test of this and like what one virus does to society and like how damaging that can be. And I think Seth, what you're bringing up is what I alluded to is like the scaling one really bad individual. Long-term trend in technology is just like making individuals more powerful.
But that's the question. We just read, Andre and I just read a book. We just read a sci-fi novel masquerading as political economy that argued that AI is all about individual disempowerment. That we're going to get the God machine that's built by the state in the project, and it's going to 1984 us constantly. That's radical human disempowerment.
Right. So if our response to individuals becoming much more powerful with technology is to expand the surveillance and control capacities of the state, and we get a loss of freedom, I think that's a genuine worry. In a general equilibrium framework, those things do freak me out for sure. But like writing emails with LLMs is not. So kind of like, there's somewhere in between that where we start worrying, and I don't think I'm at that point yet.
What about like things like transparency requirements that you oftentimes hear written about, reporting requirements, registrations with the state? Do you have any opinions about those types of policies?
I don't like them. I think they. I'll shop my book here a little bit. Like they're terrible for startups, right? Like any compliance burden you stick on startups is just like even if we might be okay specifically, like the ecosystem suffers as a result, and they do a lot of the work to discover things. So there's a big trade-off, and this happens in the privacy debate too with GDPR and what Europe's trying to do politically. No one's willing to acknowledge that there is a compliance burden competition trade-off. So if you're willing to hold firms to account in really expensive ways, you're going to get monopoly power. And that may be okay. You may decide, like, we don't want competition with this super private data that could get out to everybody. Likewise with LLMs or AI regulation, if you don't want this to be an oligopoly situation, you probably need to make it so it's easy for people to build and develop. I'm fine with whatever choice policymakers want to make, so long as they're taking that trade-off into account. I mean, they're elected officials. They're trying to make those choices on behalf of all of us. Like, if we don't like it,
officials could be using the AI to manipulate us to have the beliefs that they want us to have.
Yeah, it's true.
That's yeah. Well,
Release the Epstein files.
Wait. So Andre's moving into wrap it up mode.
Yeah.
Dan, will you tell us? So what
Yeah, well, I was going to say, is there anything you want to show us before we wrap up? That was what I was going to say.
No, I have. I thought this was a great discussion with you guys, as always. It's a pleasure to get to join you, especially as your first conversation-based guest. But as a fan, it's kind of exciting for me as well. So, I please keep it up. Listen to Justified Posteriors, folks. I would say the message I would have for listeners and economists, maybe in the audience as well, is just that I think these tools are really valuable in our work. I kind of joke that I got a model that I'm building where it shows that lower types are going to use LLMs more for like assignments. And then, of course, I'm using LLMs to help me build the model. So you say, infer what you want about my type from that. But I think
you're type. We just see you've got this. You're assuming everybody has to be equally good at everything, but you can just be good at one thing and bad at another.
Yeah, I would never claim to be a good good modeler, but it does help me get my thoughts.
You're good at something. Yeah. I think you could be a model.
And I'm gonna leave that one alone. But but I would just encourage folks to kind of be their own R&D department, as Ethan Malik says. Like, play around with these things. I think often when I talk with computer scientists, they get upset with me because I'm a little bit too pessimistic about what the models will do long term. When I talk with economists, the modal disagreement point is the other direction, where folks don't think it's going to be a big enough deal. So I would say, get out there, play with these things, learn how they work. And Anton Korenek's got a great paper on using AI in your own work. So check that one out too.
All right. Well, awesome. Thanks.
I can't think of a better place to end it.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. And listeners, please do like, comment, and subscribe. And, stay tuned for more exciting episodes.
Thanks, guys.
And if you are a super fan, you too might one day be a guest on Justified Posteriors podcast.